the host. Okay. 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 Yes.
Very good. There
Julie.
Hello.
Yeah.
So, can everybody see the screen now? I hope.
Yes.
So as I'm talking, I'm still able to see what I'm presenting, which is good because I thought that would disappear. So Falguni, if I just say next, is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
you've got control
Yeah.
of the PowerPoint. So that's next.
Okay.
You could just wink or something.
So will I start now or?
Yeah. You start.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the talk, Ceramics in the Age of the Anthropocene. Oh, what's happened?
Wait. Yeah.
I think I'm back.
Yeah.
All right. So would you like me to continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. So if you go to the next one.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just going to focus on more recent work since 2010, which really responded to species extinction and concerns about our endangered global environment. Next, please. So this is the first project that started in 2010, responding to endangered Australian birds. At the time, I was doing research about Australia's environmental situation, and I was actually really shocked to discover that we have the highest rate of species extinction in the developed world. And I just thought, well, how can this be? Because Australia seems like, for those that have been to Australia, it feels like such a environmentally friendly, clean sort of environmental country. But in fact, we have serious problems with species extinction because when we were colonized, invasive species were brought here with colonization. And because we're an island and isolated for so long, post-colonization created a huge impact on our environment. So as a response, I decided to create a project about endangered Australian birds. Next, please. And this series is representing extinct Australian birds or endangered Australian birds. The white branches and the colourful birds stand in contrast to each other, one representing the vibrant life force of the natural world and the other, the sterility of their environment, their habitat that's been impacted by human intervention. And this particular piece is an assemblage of cast porcelain. So for most of my career, I've worked with porcelain and particularly slip cast works. The next one, please. If you look closely, you can see that there's text on the branches, and that text reads as a story about this particular bird, which was last seen in 1938. Beautiful parrot and no longer exists. The next one. The swift parrot is endemic to Tasmania, and luckily we have 2,000 left because of the work of environmentalists and scientists who've been able to protect them. They were on the verge of extinction down to about 500, but we've been able to build up the population. So there's a lot of good work being done as well. This one was acquired by the National Gallery of Australia, so it's in their collection. Next, please. And a close-up of the swift parrot. Next. And this is me working in the studio. It gives you an idea of scale and the sections, the pieces that were cast separately and then assembled into these assemblages. Thank you. Next. So the next project was called Rarely Seen, and this time I decided to look at Australian flowers. Next, please. So painstakingly, I learned how to hand build flowers in Jindajian, China, which is a tradition, a very long tradition. And I was lucky to have such a fantastic teacher. So I was able to build 120 distinct, different endangered flowers from photographs and records that I'd managed to gather together. Next, please. It's assembled as a circular installation, but in the middle there's an empty copper red petri dish, which is a symbol of their slow demise. Each flower is distinct and sitting in a petri dish, because this is also about the relationship with science, which can be very positive but also destructive, because science is responsible for the development of chemicals that so impacts our environment. Next. Here are some close-ups, and it gives you an idea of the detail of each flower. And there's another shot of a closer example. Next, please. So this is the Phillip Island hibiscus, which is endangered. Very difficult to build this one. And this is me. And the next, please. This is me in the studio building these. It gives you an idea of scale. So that was a really exciting project, and that led to this one, which is called Subversive Botanica. It's an ambiguous interplay between weapon-like scientific equipment and endangered species. Each piece is about one particular flower, and there was a series of about 8 of these, guns and swords. I've decided to use weapons because I wanted to actually create a bit of an edge or a disconcerting reference to guns and weapons, anticipating the possibility of impending environmental disaster. It's also, you know, this reference to weapons that can actually protect but also destroy, preserve, and also create extinction. Next, please. Next one. So this gives you an idea of how they were constructed. A lot of what I do is slip past individual sections that are manipulated and assembled together to create the artwork. Next one. So Climate Scrolls Antarctic Ice Memory. This is a project that I just really enjoyed, and it's an example of working cross disciplines with science. When I was working at a university in South Australia, in Adelaide, I met a material scientist, Professor William Skinner, and his job was to extract ice cores from glaciers in the Antarctic. And his work inspired me so much, I decided to work in this direction, because when you drill into glaciers and extract ice cores that are sometimes 2,000–3,000 years old, these objects become a record of climate change, of climate history. They hold carbon dioxide, dust, air capsules that the scientists extract from the cores, and they are able to analyze these components and compare them to the environment that we're experiencing today, particularly the difference in carbon dioxide. So the bubbles are really important because they may hold air pockets that are thousands of years old, so they can contrast the air of the past with the atmosphere of the present. So the next slide, please. So this is where he was working, just south of Mawson in the Antarctic. And he provided me, and the next, please. And that's him there working in Law Dome. And on the right, you can see like an X-ray of an ice core. And what's really distinct are these layers, these striations. Each layer is a year of snowfall that's been compressed as ice. And this means that you can actually count back in time. You get a very accurate record of how old a particular part of the ice core is. So some of these ice cores have actually gone back millions of years, particularly the ones that the Americans are pulling out of their territory, where in Australia, we've managed to go back 10,000 years. Next, please. And the next one. And these are a few examples of the earlier ones, which were quite small. Next, please. And the next one is a close-up of the glaze. I really love these blue, luscious glazes, and these particular cores are called Antarctic blues. And the next, please. So I was working quite small, throwing the columns and then engraving the sections. And what you see there is actually real data from the real information that was sent to me by William. So I was able to transcribe live or exact research onto these art objects. So it was a really interesting connection between art and science with this project. Next, please. So I decided to go big, but to do that, I couldn't throw them myself because there's a limit to my throwing skills. And the other thing I did was to start incorporating glass, because glass is just so ice-like and so appropriate for this project, and particularly the ability of glass to capture air bubbles, which represent these air capsules from the past. Next, please. And this is the first series that I created back in 2018. And you can see the combination of coloured glass and porcelain. And this is a close-up, the next one. So you can see that I've made an effort with the next one. Thanks, Falguni. I've made an effort to create air bubbles in the glass to represent those components that can give these scientists so much information and create knowledge that can help us survive, hopefully survive the future of climate change and global warming. And the next, please.
I saw this Julie's solo in Savia Gallery in Sydney before meeting her.
2018.
Great show. Yeah.
And the next, thanks.
Yeah.
So this is where I made the work, and you can see on the right that the columns are stacked in the kiln, ready to go next to a mythological Chinese god. This is what you do in China, particularly in Jingde, which is a really amazing porcelain centre of the world. It's become quite a tourist destination now and changing really fast. But in the many years that I've been there, carrying these figures from studio to kiln on wooden carts was just an everyday event, but sadly started to disappear. So they're public firings. You don't get your own kiln. You share with everybody else and hope that your work doesn't destroy somebody else's. Next, please. And there are also some other pieces that were part of this series. And I just loved experimenting with the glazes, particularly the copper, the cobalt glaze with this lovely satin white. And this piece is actually in India somewhere. Do you know where it is, Falguni?
No, I'll check in Baroda.
Somewhere on somebody's shelf, or maybe it's in a gallery somewhere. So the project that continued after this one was also about my obsession with the Antarctic and Arctic and glaciers, and it's called Melt. And the next, thanks. 2019 in Jingde, China, during a residency, and this is where I met Falguni. Next, please. So this is a big installation, and what you see in the distance is a graph of a glacier that's 3 different stages of melt. This glacier doesn't exist anymore. Next, please. And I've emphasized that by using slip against the wall as it pools on the ground, creating these wonderful cracks as slip does when it dries. Next, please. And the next. It was quite interesting. I had to actually find a glue that would help the slip stay attached to the wall. And then also when the exhibition opened, it hadn't quite cracked enough. So myself and a few friends were there with the hairdryers to try and dry it out. So it would be appropriately cracked for the exhibition opening. Next, please. And these are the ceramic pieces that are part of that installation. They're porcelain, solid porcelain that's been cracked and ripped and cut and fired very slowly to create these floating icebergs. Next, thank you. So recently I had an exhibition at Sabia Gallery in Sydney called Evanescence. And it's about the melting of glaciers. But this work was really engaging with glass and porcelain because I was part of a residency last year at Canberra Glass Works, which is just the most extraordinary glass centre, one of the best in the world. And we're so lucky to have it in this country. So I was able to work with professionals, glass blowers, and people who had terrific knowledge. So that took my glass ability and skills to a higher level, to the point where I could integrate it more successfully with the porcelain pieces. Next, please. So this is an example of 3 porcelain pieces with a cobalt glaze and clear crystal glass. And the next, a similar series with different, the blue and white effect. And the next. And here I'm combining the porcelain pieces with blown glass, which is what you see to the left of the work. And there's a close-up next. And glass is just so luscious, and it works really well with ceramics because, you know, the surface of ceramics is glass. So they're not at all compatible, the 2 materials. They're really hard to bring together, but there's a visual compatibility happening there. Next, please. And with this particular one, they're mountain-like glacial forms, but I've inserted a glass section, which you can see right through in order to emphasize the fragility of glaciers. And the next. No glass in this one, but this is called glacial calving, which is when hot currents of water undermine a glacier, causing it to crack and calve and fall into the sea and float out as small individual icebergs.
Are these solid pieces?
No, these are press molded pieces into plaster molds.
Okay.
So the shapes were made with solid clay, but then the plaster press molds were made from the solid models, and then I press molded into the molds and then put them together.
And these molds, do you keep using them over and over again?
Oh yeah, I used them quite a few times. So there was quite a number of these that, that I made because the failure rate is actually quite high. So I wanted to make a few, hedge my bets. But I'm not using molds in its true sense, its production, industrial, original purpose. I use them more to create shapes. And in the early part of my career, I did a lot of casting of real objects, which I morphed and cut and assembled with other real objects in order to create these surreal-like objects. And you can check that out on my website if you're interested in this earlier work. So here I am at the Canberra Glassworks, just refining the section that you saw previously that was pink crystal glass. So I create the ceramics first. So you've got the shrinkage, that's all happened. And then the next thing is to go to the glass stage where I've created a plasticine prototype. And if you go to the next slide, after I've created the prototype, you can see the prototype there on the left and the final glass piece on the right. But this is not blowing, this is actual casting, which is very familiar to ceramic artists. If you go to the next one, you can see how I've created these molds from that prototype, piled the glass into the negative space of the molds, and then fired it in a glass kiln. And you get your failures too there. You could see that one was split and broken, too much pressure on the plaster, which is actually a combination of silica and plaster, 50-50, because if you just use plaster, it just wouldn't work. It would just revert into dust. But because it's combined with silica, it retains its shape. And it's usually fired to around 850, quite a low temperature. So after, the next please. So after the pieces are actually cast, then the cold working starts, which is the polishing of the surface. Now, this is another technique that I used when I was at the Canberra Glassworks. I worked with the glass blowers, and together we created the shapes that I wanted for my work. Next, please. And the skill is just, I'm so in awe of what these artists are able to do. It is really quite extraordinary. And it's something I just don't think I could imagine doing myself. Even though I've been around fire and kilns and heat all my life, I really don't think I can do what they do. So this is Nettie working on one of my pieces with her helper, Meg. Next, please. So that was the end of that particular series of work about glaciers. So when I was in India at the Global Art Festival in 2020, this is before the pandemic. And while I was there, for some reason you're not there in the photo, Falguni. Where were you? Probably organising everybody.
She was clicking it.
No, I was not there.
Where were you?
I don't know. I was at the camp, I think.
Back at the camp.
Because you guys are going every day to the White Desert, and I don't like to walk that much. So maybe.
It was a long walk. And this is what you see here is just the salt desert. It's really quite beautiful. And next, please. Actually, back in that previous photo is Po Wen, who's coming to do a workshop with you next January, which you'll really enjoy. So while that was happening, we were having such a wonderful time in Australia. Australia was burning, and it was really distressing to be not at home and to be watching this from afar, because we just lost so many lives and homes and beautiful bushland and species. But nobody was actually talking about the little insects, the small species that we lost, such as bees. Next, please. So I wanted to do a project that spoke to the demise of bee populations, not just locally in Australia, but globally. And this project's called Habitat. And this project was really different to what I normally do. I decided to work with terracotta, which is a more appropriate material for building beehives, and these sculptures that are about bees. So I wanted to create sculptures and objects that responded to the beautiful honeycombing that you see in the wild that bees create in their environment. I wanted to look at the bees' environment and to create beehives that weren't like stereotypical boxes, but were sculptural pieces, but also functional so that the bees could live in them. Next, please. So the first thing I did was to create a whole lot of models or prototypes of different shapes that responded to the honeycombing. Next, please. And also using different terracotta clays, because we've got so many beautiful different terracottas in this country. So this is one of the small prototypes that I built at the time, and a particular clay that's from a particular part of Australia, which I made a terra sigillata from. Next, please. And you can see in this photo in the studio that each clay is completely different, and it was quite lovely to have these different tones of terracotta and orange, particularly when they were shown in an exhibition. And it was quite appropriate to create a terra sigillata for the surface, because beehives need to be waterproof. And the clay was perfect for the bees as well, because it's a fantastic insulator. Hives need to keep warm during winter and cool during summer. So what you see here are very unusual shapes, but they're actually functional. And I worked with entomologists and beekeepers to make sure what I was building wasn't going to be unsuitable for bees to live in. Next, please. So I spent a bit of time at beekeeping locations to learn about bees. Well suited up here. Next, please. And this is when I populated one of my hives, which I connected to the queen's hive. And the bottom of my beehive is open, and I created an opening in her hive. So the bees immediately came up into my sculptural hive, and it took 3 months for them to build the honeycombing. Then I was able to evacuate it so I could take it to exhibition. Otherwise, I don't think having the bees in the hive would have been great for the audience. Next, please. And this is how it was shown at the exhibition. So even though it's quite sort of aesthetically sculptural, there are functional aspects, like the opening had to be the size of 2 bees, so one could go in and one could go out. The holes are for ventilation. The terra sigillata is for protection against the elements. The lid is there so you can look inside and see how things are going. This is not a hive where you're cultivating honey. It's more about a hive for the bees, not for us. It's not for our cultivation of honey, it's for them to enjoy. And they loved it. Next, please. So I have put a couple of these hives into the environment, and they've been populated quite naturally. All I needed to do was coax them with a bit of wax and honey and leave that inside the cavity, and they just immediately started to populate the interior, even without a queen in there. So that was nice to know that I was creating a user-friendly object. Next, please. And that gives you a picture of how the hive looked with the bees inside. And then the next one is after the evacuation of the hive. That's it. Next, please. So this is an exhibition that I had in Canberra with a former student from the Australian National University, and she was also working with bees, but her work was so different and really interesting. She's creating bee shapes and placing it on detritus or rocks that look like chemical pollutant. But she's creating this with burnouts using bone china. So she dips found objects like leaves and thistles into bone china. Then she fires the separate pieces and then builds it together to create these tiny bees. So the show was very, very different work, but very complementary. Next, please. And there was also sculptural work in this show, plus the functioning beehives. Next, please. So while I was in India at the end of last year, the Earth We Share, the ceramic camp in Baroda, I was able to build another beehive, which is there, I think. Next, please. There it is, there on the right. So I'm hoping that the bees are happily living in that particular hive as well. And I think we just have one more slide to go. And that's everybody at the ceramic camp last year, which was a fantastic experience. And I think that's the
it
end.
was,
I made
was, we have
Thank you, Falguni.
yeah, 3 of your work is in Baroda. So yeah, from this series. So, we are going to try at least one with Priyank to put in the garden or somewhere where and try to get these. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And,
Are there
we'll
any
share.
questions?
Yeah, we are open for.
Thank you,
Julie,
everybody. So patient.
Julie, I have a question.
Yes, thank you.
These cylindrical forms you showed of the strata of snowfall annual, and you said that the Americans are drilling to 1 million millennia or something. How is that even?
A
How is
million
it
years.
even possible?
It's the deeper you go, so they've been able to drill into a very deep glacier that's been there for a long, long time.
But typically 1 year of snowfall would be 1 inch, 2 inches. How much would it show?
It depends. It changes depending on how heavy the snowfall is that year. But I know it's extraordinary to think, well, this is what they're claiming. So
yeah,
I'm really hoping that if that's possible, that would be extraordinary. But we've only been able to do 10,000 years. You know, the Americans.
It's 1 inch, it's 10,000 inches. Yeah, that they're drilling. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they must have some extraordinary technology to be able to do that.
Oh. No, it's beautiful how you're interpreting this whole process.
Thank you. It was really great to work outside my comfort zone with a scientist and to try and work out how to firstly understand what he was doing and then bring it into the art process and how to apply it. Because it was real information. All of those layers are actually from the ice core that William extracted.
Did you visit the site where they were doing this in Antarctica?
I've been trying to get to the Antarctic for a long time, not yet, but it's on one of my bucket list.
All right.
But a lot of these cores, they keep them in fridges. They're like ice core libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to go to where William works, which is called the WOCEK Institute in Adelaide. And he was able to show me a number of ice cores, not the particular one that I worked from, but other cores that he'd extracted, because they only keep certain parts of it that is valuable for their research.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Nobody has questions?
I would like to know how the glass and the ceramic were, fused together, or did you do it separately and then just attached it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's probably the most difficult thing I've ever done. Because firstly, you need to make the porcelain and get that shrinkage out of the way. And then when you make the glass, it has a slight shrinkage too, but not as dramatic. And so after the glass is made, then the gluing happens. So you can't just use a normal glue. It's a special glass glue called Hextol. And it's something that takes 3 days in a hot environment for it to fuse, and then another 10 days for it to set. So it's not a straightforward process of gluing, but the glue is strong enough to glue a grand piano to the ceiling, I'd say.
Wow.
Yeah,
so they're never going to come apart.
No, my thing is like the casting which you did of the glass is the size of the ceramic. Did you have to grind the glass just to get it in the straight line or something? Or when you're fusing it, before fusing it, do you get into the perfect shape of ceramics, the size of ceramic?
Yeah, that's spot on. And that's the essence of what happens. The prototype or the model has to be so perfect. If it's slightly out, then that creates a whole lot of work afterwards where you have to grind it to the proper shape so it fits.
And this is all blown glass. This is all
no,
blown glass.
This is cast glass. This is
Cast glass. Okay.
the sections.
So solid.
Okay. Solid glass.
Yeah, it's solid.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
thank you so much. Your work is fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being so patient.
It's amazing. Amazing.
So I was just going to say, when you look at those big ice cores, those glass sections are solid, which is why I was able to create those little air bubbles inside the glass. Whereas blowing is more about hollow objects. I mean, some sections are really thick, but mostly blowing is about solid, hollow objects.
Okay.
This is Ruby here. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Ruby, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Yeah, I was just wondering that you managed to get the glass to shrink perfectly to match the space with the ceramic. So did you have to do a lot of calculation for that? Because glass shrinks very differently compared to ceramics.
Yeah, the glass shrinkage is very minimal compared to ceramics.
Uh-huh.
So I actually didn't really calculate that. I just realized that it was like a millimeter difference.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the problem is if something goes wrong with the casting and you've got a rough surface, and if you have to grind more than a millimeter off, then you get a problem with fit.
Yeah.
So
I tried a long time
the casting works out.
I tried a long time ago fusing two ceramic, glass and ceramic, but I was totally unsuccessful.
Were you doing it together in a fire?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, together in a kiln.
I've actually done that with students, and usually the glass cracks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what happened. Yeah.
Sometimes the effects are so beautiful, you just put up with the cracks, and it's like, oh, well, it looks fabulous. Forget about the cracks.
It's fabulous work, fabulous. Something that sort of, one dreams of fusing, putting glass and ceramic together. It's amazing. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I'm planning a workshop with Julie also, maybe next year and or sometime when she's free.
Oh, that'll be
So,
lovely.
Yeah.
It'd be fabulous.
In Calcutta?
Yes.
Then we can do the glass with Srila. That'll be lovely.
Yeah, so we have a glass studio here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Lovely. Okay, great. Thank you.
Julie, we had a project long ago where a very big Indian curator, Rajiv Sethi, had taken over the artwork for the Hyatt in Chennai, which was initially an abandoned building for a decade. And the inside courtyard, which was like 20 stories high, had got these huge beehives. So he took that as the whatever you call it, the inspiration for all the artwork that the client had commissioned for that entire building and the hotel. And everything there was to do with bees and hives. And when you come to Chennai, you must see that, because we have these people working with resin and various materials, everything. And everything is to do with the beehives. And they have a walking tour for people who just want to know what's happening. They even came out with a big catalog about all the works done there. And Ray Meeker had combined with Rajiv Sethi, and we had done the complete sculpture garden outside with a similar motif and a similar idea. So it was a project to do with the hives. And when you showed us the hive thing, this was what I thought I should share with you.
Oh, that's thank you. Where did you say in Chennai it was?
This is at the Hyatt Regency in Chennai, in
Oh,
Nungambakkam.
the Hyatt, how appropriate.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Oh, that's
remember
great
seeing
because
that.
that means, sorry?
I remember seeing that abandoned structure before the work had started, and those hives were incredible. They, of course, took them out correctly and everything appropriately. And then when the building construction started, that abandoned building was taken over by the Hyatt and made into what is there today. And that project was quite something.
And it's great that there's public access, that it's not in executive rooms that you have to pay too much money in order to stay in.
It's open to public.
So we can all see the work.
Anybody can go there and wander around all the passages, the corridors, all the artwork, the paintings, drawings, everything, not just sculpture, was to do with hives and beehives and society and stuff like that.
And bees are so inspirational because they're creators and they're natural creators. So it's really inspirational to work with bees. It's a wonderful project. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Hello, Julie. This is Sushma here.
Hi.
Truly inspirational, your work. And, right from choosing a topic and how the amount of research you put in for the topic and how you go about it, your processes are really incredible. How long does it take for you to see it from start to finish when you take on something like this?
They're all different. With the Ice Core project, that went on for about 4 years. And I think really it was because I was learning anew how to work with glass. It really extended the time frame because I started when I was sharing a ceramic department at the University of South Australia with the glass artists, the glass students, and they were actually teaching me on the job how to work with glass. They were so fantastic and really patient. So that's when I started, and it just kept going right through until 2019. So it started about 2016, even earlier.
So when you come up with topics like this, is it like based on your own topics, and then after you've completed the work, you have a show, or do you have some kind of an end point and then you work towards it?
I really like to have a show at the end of a project because it gives you a focus and it just gives you that impetus to work towards something where you can present and share with the public. So I really do like to have a presentation of some kind at the end.
I truly love your work. The fact that, it's so, you have all aspects in it. You've got material research and you've got something functional, non-functional, everything put together. It's very complete. Thank you so much for sharing your work.
Thank you. My pleasure. I actually must say that I was very lucky. I had a really, I'm afraid I have to tell you, I was a student I graduated in 1988. And I had 3 years at a place called the National Art School in Sydney. And that sort of ceramic education doesn't exist anymore, where you're working with teachers from 9 to 5 days a week, face to face. It was just extraordinary. So a lot of the people that studied with me, we've all had this breadth of skill, which gives you a lot of confidence to bring any sort of topic into your world, because you know that you can either throw or hand build or cast or work out your glaze technology because of that training. So I was really very fortunate.
Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yes, I do have a question. Dr. Julie, thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Yatri, and I just have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
So I really admire the visual language of your pieces, because these are all such varied, especially the contrast between the glacier pieces as well as the beehive pieces, but somehow the visual language translated through, even though there's such different topics. So my question is, how did you decide on the shape of the terracotta hives? Did it have anything to do with the study you might have conducted with the bees and how they build their hives? So yeah, that is my question. And the second part of that question is, how did you manage to coax the bees into using the hives?
So in answer to your first question, I gathered as many photographs as I could of natural honeycombing in the wild. So the bees create, when they're not in human-made hives, they create their own hives that are suspended from branches. And the shapes are these U shapes, beautiful elliptical U shapes. And that's what inspired me in terms of the forms of the prototypes that I started to work on. Because I wanted to bring their world into my world. I didn't want to impose my world onto theirs, because a box, which is the usual way that bees populate for beekeepers, it's the Langstroth wooden box for producing honey, is such a reflection of the human built environment. So I didn't want to go in that direction. So I went into the bees world and collected images and drew shapes of their world. And then that translated into the small prototypes from which the big hives developed. And as far as coaxing the bees into the hives, the first technique was cheating, because I connected my hive to a Langstroth wooden box hive where the queen was situated, and they were able to migrate from their hive into mine. But the second time I tried it, I actually coaxed them into the cavity of my hive by placing wax inside that was saturated with honey, and that attracts the bees. And that's how I populated the hives independently.
Thank you so much. Lovely projects. Really admired it.
Are your works, Amber here, Amber Agnihotri, your works are slip cast works and molds, and how do you sort of like somebody was talking about beehive? I mean, visualizing a form with so much of holes in it and details.
I've just missed that last little bit.
For example, the
You're
beehive.
asking about the building techniques?
Yes, I'm talking about the building techniques. How do you go? Generally, what is the process like? What is?
So which project are you interested in? Because each one's quite different. So do you mean the beehive project, the habitat project, or? One of them, one of was the beehive project. The other one was about the white forms that look like waves. Oh, okay. So the beehive project, that's hand building and slab and coil construction. So just responding to the small models and then building with a banding wheel using coil and slab construction. But the evanescence with the glass and the porcelain, those sort of wave flowing forms, they're press molded into a plaster mold. So I created the plaster mold first with a solid clay prototype, and then cast from the solid clay prototype 2 sections, and then threw out the modeling clay, and then pressed into the mold and joined them together.
And for example, when you have glass, the glasses you showed one of those glasses that was almost like the Dali's melted clock form, and it sort of goes up and sort of lands onto the ceramic work.
Oh, right.
So how do you are they fused together, or are they just the temporary?
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's you can't actually blow. The picture that I showed you of Nettie blowing in the hot shop, she's not actually blowing onto my ceramic piece that's finished. She's actually blowing onto a plaster copy of a section where I wanted to place the glass, because if she blew onto the ceramic, it would crack from the heat. And so what she does is she blows onto a plaster replica that with graphite in between so that they don't stick. It's really quite technical, but this is how they do this every day. For me, it was just a miracle, and to watch them do what they do, yeah.
So obviously, Julie, they also do a very long process of annealing for these glass castings, I'm presuming.
Yeah, well, they're not that thick, the cast sections. So the annealing was for the plaster and silicone molds. I fired for 5 days. So the firing itself is just a day and a bit, and the rest of the time is annealing. So yeah, you're correct.
It's a long annealing.
Yes.
Okay,
It's actually not a
guys.
very, sorry.
Now, the last question. Any last question? Then we can, by 12:30, we will wind up.
Sorry.
Can you hear?
Any other? Yes.
I'm just telling everyone one last question, and then we can wind up. Is there any question?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jannavi here.
Hi.
I want to ask, how did you manage to build those bullet forms? I mean, separately cast small elements. How did you join them?
Oh, do you mean the guns?
Guns, yes.
Yes. So I collected glass chemistry apparatus, like flasks and tubes and all sorts of things from a chemistry glass shop. And then I made molds of those. And then I slip cast with porcelain into those molds. So they all came out individually, separately. So then I assembled them by joining them with slip into the gun forms. I've also created swords as well. So that's how they were constructed. And then, fired to 1300, which is very high. Wow. It can cause lots of cracking, and so you have to be very careful with your building.
Yeah, because it looks so finished and beautiful after firing. It's very, very difficult to actually handle porcelain that fragile at every stage. So incredible. I love the outcome.
But actually, the reason why I've worked in China, I mostly work in China and have done so since about 2007. Their porcelain is extraordinary. It's incredibly plastic and resilient. And I've tried, and I also use porcelain in Australia, but I just cannot get it to do what Chinese porcelain can do.
Southern Ice. Southern Ice.
Yeah, and I've worked with Southern Ice. It doesn't even stand up to any of the Chinese porcelains. It's beautiful and white, but it just you can't hand build with Southern Ice. You can throw and cast, but with the super, they call it super white from Jindajiang, you can virtually do anything with it.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
Julie, maybe you can put your email, your website on chat so they can access your website, and or I will share on the group. That is also possible. Yeah.
So thank you, Falguni, for inviting me, and everybody for being so patient today.
Thank you. It was lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
All these things keep happening, so don't worry about it. So we manage. So.
I love to. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to use my research skills and find out what.
So maybe if you want, we can try one session later, not today, next week, and you can try to share screen and stuff
I'd
like
love to
that.
get it
So,
right now that
yeah.
we've had this experience.
Yeah. So, okay. Great.
Okay.
Great, and thank you for giving
Thank you,
us
everybody.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really.
We would love to listen to your travels, about your travels also.
Yes,
Oh,
maybe one
that
presentation
will
you
go
can
on.
do.
That will go on forever.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.